I wouldn't do a PhD. I couldn't write in the ivory tower language of a PhD. However, when Mags has done that, I would love to get my teeth stuck into translating it into plain English that I can understand.
You're hired.
That's fun. That would be groovy work.
You heard Ewan McIntosh there talking to us on the CESI staff room. Ewan McIntosh is the founder of the consulting firm NoTosh. And if you want to find out a bit more about him, there's more in the description below. He's a man you want to listen to, and when he talks, you can't help but listen to him, and that'll all become a bit clearer later on in the episode. You also heard from Mags Amond. Mags Amond is a friend of mine, a friend of CESI, a friend of everybody. She's one of these people that if she was standing beside the Pope, people would be saying, "Who's your man standing beside Mags?" Anyway, Mags, according to herself, is a retired teacher. Again, according to herself, she's slightly tired but a happy researcher. She's almost finished her PhD and has several knitting projects on the go. She loves life, loves family, loves CESI, and loves her colleagues. She loves what she does, and she loves Teachmeets. This CESI staff room started off talking about Teachmeets, and we're a bit late. We were meant to upload a day ago, but we're a bit late because I listened to it and listened to it and listened to it, and in the edit I felt that I buried the lead. What lead am I talking about? Well, at the very end of the tail end of the episode, we talk about building the best school in the world with Ewan McIntosh, and that to me is an intriguing idea. I spoke to him about it, and frankly, if it wasn't for the fact that we were an hour in or an hour plus into it, I would have drilled down a bit more into that concept of building the best school in the world. Anyway, if you want to know more about that, that's to come in the CESI staff room. As always, if you have anything to contribute to the CESI staff room, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact me directly on Twitter at Hassan Dabbagh, or you can contact CESI directly on the website www.cesi, that's CESI, that's Computers in Education Society of Ireland, .ie. We would love to hear from you. And something that I haven't been doing, I'm going to ask you, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, please share. If you don't like the podcast, if you like the podcast, tell a friend. If you don't like the podcast, tell nobody. We were trying to build up our base at the minute, so we would appreciate your support. So please, I think the kids say like, share, and subscribe. So we started off asking Ewan about the origins of Teachmeet.
Teachmeet is a meeting of teachers with no PowerPoint, with no keynotes, with no sponsored talks. It's the antithesis of every big education event that you go to. And it was designed to give a voice to teachers whose voices would normally not be heard, and to throw up surprises, both the surprise of that just genius moment from a beautiful new person that you've never seen before, and of course the occasional dull as ditch water geek talk for, and the idea was, if it's one of those, it's only going to last 7 minutes, which is time enough to nip to the loo, go and grab a pint, or do whatever you need to do, come back, and there was a pretty good chance the next talk would be a winner. And we had these, it was born out of a frustration. I was at, I remember at Scottish Learning Festival, or it might have been called SET back then. It was in ancient times, in 2005, in the September time. And John Johnson, a teacher from Glasgow, and David Noble, who's an amazing teacher in the National Health Service, in fact, works in a school for kids who don't fit in the mainstream schooling for lots of different reasons. We were having a chat about just how, yes, the keynotes that were there that year at the festival were fantastic, but they were talking about stuff in the future tense that we'd been doing in the previous week with our classes. And we just thought, why are we sat here listening to people kind of singing to our choir? And we knew that lots of people in the audience, it would be the first time they had heard about it, but we wanted something for us. And we said, that idea was pitched then as a vague, we should do something. And then at the Edinburgh Live festival later in that school year in 2006, it was the same again. And no offence to two people who I count amongst as friends, Will Richardson and Alan November were giving keynotes at this Edinburgh City Council technology event. Again, telling stories of stuff that were great, but we were already doing them. And in fact, we were doing them even better in Scottish schools. And yet our voices weren't heard. And I know that anyone in Ireland would share the same tall poppy syndrome that we have here in Scotland, which is if you're doing good stuff, don't talk about it too loudly. Yeah. So we said, let's go to the pub. There was a pub relatively close by that had Wi-Fi called the Jolly Judge. And that evening, we managed to corral about 14 people. I got into the boot of my colleague's car. We transported everyone we could in his Volvo Estate with me crouched illegally in the back, dropped us all off at the Jolly Judge, went down there. And that's where it was Scott EduBlog's meetup, we called it. That's where Teachmeet was born. And we realized that through that first conversation, it wasn't just about technology. It wasn't certainly about blogging. It was about creativity, creative thinking, beautiful things that people were doing in their classes with their kids. And so we needed a different name. And that's where Teachmeet emerged later that year. Back at that Scottish Learning Festival in September 2006 as a thing in a hotel bedroom that we commandeered. And we packed 60 people into that bedroom for a learning session that lasted about 4 hours with free wine. David Weinberger, internet hero, was there sitting on the floor because there were no seats left. Even my mother came along. The whole family was there, and it felt like a new family. It felt like a whole bunch of people whose voices were worth hearing, but they had nowhere to stand and share their voice.
Mags, Teachmeets in Ireland, talk to me about them and your involvement.
Well, something like what Ewan said, it was a reaction to something that happened. I was involved in a group called CESI. You are, this is where we are in the CESI staff room. But very suddenly, very, very suddenly, we lost a day of CPD that we had been given permission to take teachers out of school for by the Department of Education. And I had seen Ewan and the Teachmeet at the Scottish Learning Festival, and seeing that really, it really turned my brain around. And hearing David Noel talk about what he was doing, and we just took a chance. And there's a lot of trust in Teachmeet. I think Ewan will agree with this. There's a huge amount of trust in each other, in your peers. Of course, every so often something might go belly up, but we took a chance. And Conor Galvin at the time was chair of CESI, kind of talked to Conor about it, and we said, look, let's go for this thing. I always call it a thing because before you come up with Teachmeet, you were calling it this thing. And we rented a hotel room, 60 people turned up. Sometimes you'd hear 600 were there when everyone says I was there. And for me, I knew it was definitely a thing when I copied what I'd seen Ewan do. And this is what Teachmeet does. It evolves from each other. I sent people away to 4 different corners of the hotel. Imagine sending people out in Ireland in a hotel and saying, talk about education. I had 4 people who wanted to lead the conversations. And I wandered through that hotel at about 9 o'clock at night, and I found the 4 corners and I listened into the 4 conversations. And, I could hardly get them back to the room. And for me, that's when Teachmeet started in Ireland. And that's when I knew it was going to be a thing, and something in my soul. I just knew there was joy in learning together. And I kind of knew it was going to be the thing that I ended up, I didn't know then I would end up studying it. But there was just something in that moment that I felt at the Scottish Learning Festival 6 months beforehand. We can trust each other to teach each other.
There's something really important in the context of that time, though, as well, which is that professional learning was never run in that way. And so actually a lot of the ways that people go about running a really successful Teachmeet, today you might look back and say, well, that's just good professional learning. You've got to remember, in 2006, you paid big bucks to have generally American keynoters come and tell you how to do your job. You would have workshops where people with job titles of a certain pedigree would tell you the best practice. That's how it was organized. And in fact, even the the CESI conference in 2007, I keynoted that. And I was stood in a room full of people that I considered, some of them were my kind of thought heroes, teacher practitioners, but the people sitting next to them didn't know that they were doing it. And it was also pre-social media. So there was no other way for people really to share their practice. A lot of people said, I'm not really a writer, so I can't blog. You got to remember that YouTube was a couple of lip sync videos at the time. It wasn't really a massive big thing that people might consider putting a talking head up. And you couldn't just open up Zoom and record yourself and put that up on YouTube or use your phone, because smartphones didn't do that. There was quite a lot of technological barrier to doing what was much easier in a pub or in a hotel, in a non-education environment, getting people out of their comfort zone. And I guess the question in my mind is always, is this format still relevant today? When actually, if you go to a really well-run conference, there's loads of opportunity to network and connect and have informal dialogue and hear lots of voices. And then I see a badly run Teachmeet where you have 3 keynoters and the sponsor talk, and I think, yeah, there's still a need for it. There's still a need to remind people that this kind of grassroots movement shouldn't ever be assumed to be safe in the hands of a commercial or even a government-run event, because there are always politics at play or commercials at play in those two things.
Something lovely you just said there, that sorry, Has, that it's the person beside you at the Teachmeet that's the key, and that's come out of what I've heard from everyone I've been listening to for 4 years now. And it goes back to Weiner's law of the law of, it's a cheeky law of conventional conferences. The sum of what's in the room is much greater than the sum of what's on the stage. We need to start listening to each other, horizontalizing things.
Yeah, I always remember that. Yeah, on you go, Hassan.
Isn't it funny, ironic, whatever you want to call it, that you're pulling teachers out of a non-education environment, putting them together to learn and to talk about education and to talk about what's working for them. I always thought that a bit bizarre.
But if you ask any kid, what's your favorite experience at school? And it's the reason I was a French and German teacher. It's the school trips, it's the foreign exchange, it's the Duke of Edinburgh Award. It's all the stuff that didn't take place in a classroom. It might be a project that they remember, that it was great, but generally the project involved something away from the classroom. The idea that learning that quality learning is the exclusive kind of responsibility of the 4 walls of a classroom or a school is nonsense, and it always has been. Great learning happens when you're primed for it. And I would argue most schooling environments are not primed for all types of learning. They're really good for some. They're actually pretty atrocious for professional learning. That's why when people say to me, would you like to, we're going to run an event, we need you to do it in our school. I won't do it unless I can see the school for myself plenty of time ahead. And a few times we've just said, nah, this is a crappy environment. We're trying to help people teach in a different way, think about learning in a different way, and the whole environment is set up for the industrial complex that we're suggesting doesn't really work very well. And at the same time, there's a lot of quite traditional learning and teaching stuff that still needs taught. People need to know what feedback routines look like. They need to understand how to ask great questions in a class, and they need to be able to do that in their class. That's a different kind of learning. That's kind of like coaching, peer-to-peer learning, where you should be learning that stuff, I think, as you go with your kids in your class with a buddy on hand. What we're talking about is kind of the breaking the mold learning, which is you need to be away from business as usual in order to look back on it with a critical eye.
Mags, you wanted to jump in there?
Well, I wanted to hop in there, yeah. And I was saying one of the lovely things about Teachmeet is it's what people really appreciate. It's that little window into that classroom of where there is pocket of excellence, or something lovely has worked for somebody, and they don't get to show it to anybody. No one gets to see it, but they can take it to a Teachmeet, do an annual presentation. Look, this happened on Wednesday afternoon, X, Y, and Z. The reaction was, and you can see people. This is when I find people pull their phones out and go click or jot something down, something for Monday. I'm going to try that. next week. So it's kind of like a micro level of professional
And
development.
the other thing is that seeing into other people's schools, because their learning environment is different. And I always remember just loving hearing John Dabbagh. We did a teach meet in Redbridge in a school. Talking of which, they do happen in schools, but we did it in a great kind of, it was a Victorian edifice of a school with lots of little rooms and winding corridors. It's the kind of thing that people, Irish pub owners spend a fortune trying to recreate out of MDF. This school had the original Victorian kind of thing going on, and it was full a rabbit warren of little rooms. And I remember hearing John Dabbagh stood up talking about the learning centre that he ran for really challenging kids. And it was completely different from anything we had seen or heard about before. And then what was interesting, he didn't show one photograph of the learning environment, but he painted such a strong picture of what this place looked like and felt like that we all wanted to go and work there afterwards. And we all wanted to work for him. And you get moments like that where you get that insight. But going to Mag's previous point, the person next to you can also do the same. I always remember when we took Teachmeet to England at that Redbridge event. That was the first time it had sort of gone south of the border or over any border. And then we went to the Bet Festival, and we were given a space to run one there, and we were given, these were the days, £5,000 from RM to put behind the bar. RM was a technology company, for those who've never heard of it, which might be younger generations may never have heard of it. And we had a great time. But sat at my table next to me was Juliet Heppel, and she had been looking at learning environments along with her father, experimenting with learning environments with some of her students. And I was actually more interested in the 2-minute discussions between the talks so that I could learn a little bit more about her work. But it was also a professional connection and a personal connection that stays to this day. And now we don't talk about learning at all. We talk about kids and holidays and going to the beaches and things like that. We don't really talk about work. For me, that's just as important, that kind of friendship group that I've grown, which includes John and it includes Mags as well. There's just in a way that matters more to me than the tips and tricks I might have picked up. And that's why when I see a host of a Teachmeet rushing through presentations, trying to get as many people on the stage as possible, I always think they're missing a trick. You kind of want to leave people a chance to have a jar. And if you've ever gone to a folk session at the Cobblestone, you know what that's like. They'll play a tune and then they all stop. And the tourists are always hungry for more tunes, and they sit there in silence waiting for the next tune as if it's a concert. That's like the traditional conference almost. Whereas the locals and adopted locals like me will speak to the random stranger next to them about what they've just heard or about what's coming up or about what they're drinking or something. There's a human connection that's made. Why go to a folk session? You don't go to a folk session just to listen to the music. You shut up when the music's on, and as soon as it's done, you have a bit of banter with the person next to you. And I think that that's maybe why it works really well in countries like ours, where we have a folk tradition, because that folk tradition translates really well into learning.
It's I love that analogy. I love taking it from the folk singing point of view and the sharing, because there was a time, if you said to a teacher, why don't you share your work with another teacher? They'd be like, oh my gosh, no, what are you on about? No way. But if you told that same teacher, will you tell us a story about something that happened in your classroom that worked? They're happy. They'll tell you that story. We love a good story. We love to tell a story.
With people, it's always wee Jamie. They're always called Jamie or Kellyanne in Scotland, but it's always the story, and it adds the colour that makes you actually listen to the story and then nick an idea. And that's the key. We wanted people to steal an idea, and everyone had to. It's George Bernard Shaw, isn't it? If I give you an apple and you give me an apple, we each have an apple. But if I give you an idea and you give me an idea, we each have 2 ideas. And I think that's the principle. If you sit there passive, trying to learn from the people on the stage, you're kind of doing yourself out of all these idea apples around you that you could be stealing.
Yeah, and in Irish, the word for that idea exchange, Sarah Jane, one of the Irish CESI teachers, she calls it a spraggle. So you just want to get enough of an idea of what the thing is so you can go and find the rest yourself. It's a jump forward, igniting. It's just gore. It's a lovely thought. It's a lovely analogy. And look at Hassan, when you said about non-teachers and teachers being there, the coolest thing that you can imagine that people love about a teach meet is the mixture.
Yeah.
This is really weird. Most of the other professional development, by dint of its nature that you go to, it's all French teachers at the district, or it's all science teachers in school, or it's whatever, everybody looking at one topic. But you go into Teach Meet, you have got pre-service teachers, teachers of teachers, primary, secondary, third, vendors. Like, you're not a teacher, Hassan. You go to Teach Meets and you run Teach Meets. So you've got everybody who's got the shared values around education, listening to what they do at the other level. And that I've had really good conversations about this. Should the Teach Meet be just secondary, just primary, just whatever? Or should it be all of us in the pool together? And all of us in the pool together it's on fire. Well, it's electric.
It makes such a, you realize you have more in common. But I think the other thing is, I realized this after a while, and I think maybe after 4 or 5 years of these events beginning to happen more and more. And it's funny you mentioned Conor Galvin, because at the time he was doing a lot of the European funded work. And I was one of the first teachers in Europe. I only discovered this later, but I think I was teacher 83 in e-twinning.
Wow.
And I was a really enthusiastic teacher with far too much time on my hands, but I signed up and I was taking part in these events, and he was really keen. He loved it, I think, because it was a chance to discover new talent. It was a chance to see new ideas and fresh ideas. Something really interesting though is that in traditional conference settings, you would hear this keynote telling stories that were vaguely familiar. You'd seen it somewhere, you'd seen the example on a blog somewhere, but I always found that their sourcing was really weak. Why? Because they're the keynote. They're the ones that are meant to be showbiz hands, making people feel warmed up. And at a Teach Meet, what you become very aware of is that in the room are the people who did the innovations the first time around that you're now building on, and you're sharing something back. So generally people doff their hat to so-and-so or so-and-so who they, I nicked this bit of the idea from that person and I've added this part onto it. Even in the first 1 or 2 Teach Meets, there were some commercial providers who had their app, their tool, broken by practitioners and made better. And they would share that. And that's what I mean by kind of having a trail. You wouldn't dare cast off someone else's work as your own in a Teach Meet environment, because someone would speak up, you'd be interrupted, or people would just start laughing at you, Whereas in a traditional conference, and I hate to say it, online, the idea that you can just rip someone off and get away with it is rampant. And unfortunately, in a lot of teacher innovation that I see online as people share their practice, they're not giving a nod as to where things came from, which means you can't do what Mags suggested, which is go off and Google it for yourself and find out for yourself, because you have no idea where the DNA of the idea came from. And I think that's something that the physical event still keeps people in check, because there's a really good chance that the person you're referring to is sat in the room.
Can I do an anecdote, Has, which is on that level, that beautiful, beautiful level of humility? I got an email once from someone saying, Max, there's a Teach Meet coming up. Can I do a presentation, please? Whatever. I want to talk about Audacity. I said, yeah, sure. Irish teachers love Audacity. Yeah, let's go for that. And we went to the Teach Meet, and this very, very humble man came up and said, I want your help to translate Audacity into Irish. I'm James Crook. Hello. So this was, so here we, it was just I think it's the only time I actually almost swooned at a Teach Meet. But this is what Ewan, I think, is referring to, this extreme humility that we can sometimes find. It's lovely.
And you don't find it online in the same way. People do seem to operate in the understanding that, well, if I declare this piece of work my own, then it must be, and I think it's I think I think that's something I would love to maybe take on next, is that you think about what can a Teachmeet do now that it couldn't do however many years ago it is now.
Yeah.
The potential for, so if you go back to 2006, 2007, there weren't that many people sharing online. I think there was a point, I don't know when, probably around 2012, 2013, where I used to be able to read all the people that I admired on an RSS reader in of an hour in the morning. And then there was a real tipping point where a lot of people were sharing their practice online. And now you've got these blogs with huge followings, 9 million teachers following a particular teaching blog with teaching tips. And you've got the amazing kind of teacher toolkit with Ross and his team developing ideas. You've got incredible low-cost publications from people like Crown Publishing and other folk like that, where practitioners and people who are not practitioners now but have a real craft at writing and explaining teaching ideas are able to share. So there's a point where I sort of think, well, if I had 2.5 hours of time or 3 hours of time, would I go to a Teachmeet to hear about those things, or would I just buy the book on Amazon and read it and dip into it in my own time? And I think that's a risk for any kind of professional learning, is that you've always got the status quo of just not learning. You've then got this new thing of actually really cheap, highly personalized approaches to getting what you think you already need. So Teachmeets have really two things up their sleeve. One is serendipity, throwing stuff in front of you that you would never have thought to ask about, look at, or bump into. And I think that's a massive role. Because they're linear, there is no choice. They are done by surprise. It's a raffle draw as to who speaks next. So there's no pre-program that makes you decide whether you're going to go or not. That serendipity has really got to stay. And I think it's quite a unique positioning, if you like, for a Teachmeet. But I think the other thing is, if Teachmeets were able to help people trace the roots of ideas, you would have something fascinating. And I don't have a clue how you'd go about doing it, other than each person contributing, taking maybe a little bit more care to try and trace the ideas, or having time at a Teachmeet for the participants to help identify where the DNA of an idea has come from. Because when you know where the DNA of an idea has come from, it makes you able to change the idea and make it even better.
It's about joining the dots. I'm always saying this, and it's not my line at all. Like Steve Jobs said it, we can look forward. I think you can't join the dots looking forward. You can join the dots looking back, where you came from, kind of thing.
But he also said you got to have enough dots to join up in the first place.
Yes.
And I think that's where the power of the room, being there in a hot house for 90 minutes or 2 hours, gives you more dots than you would know what to do with. But you got to give people time to help join all those up. And I would love to see that visualized with an illustration, or maybe it's post-it notes or whatever. But imagine the DNA of a Teachmeet actually being something that you can see after the event. Maybe it's on a Miro board, and you can see, well, the person talked about that, and these are the ideas that are in it, which came from these people. And I think that would be fascinating to try once and see if it offers any value. But I know ideas are worthless for me unless I know where they came from, because it's a little bit like playing music. If you don't know what you're borrowing from, then you can't really innovate. You're only ever copying and pasting. You can't really come up with your own sound. And the same is going to be true for ideas in teaching and learning. And we're talking about creative teaching and learning. We're not talking about best practice or research informed. We're talking about having fun with ideas around teaching and learning. And I
know my brother-in-law, there was a Teachmeet we organized in Mayo, and I remember asking, I was blown away. My first Teachmeet, I saw it at CESI, and I just went, this is amazing. So they're up here. They're not talking about, again, like you said, they're not talking about stuff like the best practice, the titles, the subtitles. They're talking about, I did this and this worked. I engaged with the student this way, and it worked for me. So I one of the Teachmeets, I thought, you have to pass this on. So we went down to Mayo, told them in Mayo, we want to organize a Teachmeet for a Friday night. And people were laughing at me, going, Friday night, are you insane? And something, Ewan, you said your mother was there. I had a table in the education centre booked for just my family. Do you know,
I love
and
it.
my sisters and my mother. I said, just in case nobody turns up. But my brother-in-law, who's a teacher, came up. He said, I have an idea, but I don't know if, like, is this what you're talking about? And he had the words. Mags, you can help me here. Where they have the words on the board, the you see it in classrooms now, the topics. Well, his
Oh, it may be the learning intentions, is
that's
it?
That's it. So he put all his learning intentions on little key rings, and that was his thing. And he said he'd pick a load of key rings out of the bowl of a day, and he said that we're going to do this, this, and this. And he felt that wasn't that nobody be interested in that. But I've heard since that there are teachers doing it in a different way, and they're telling me about it, just like you said, Ewan. They're going,
Yeah.
I have this great idea, except it's not a keyring. And I said, I know where that came from, and it was from a little teach meet in Mayo. Mags, you wanted to jump in there?
No, that's really, really important. Two things that your brother-in-law said was, I don't think this is what people would like. I think, see what you think, Ewan. One of the things, and you touched on it earlier, Hassan, is that having a teach meet as your sort of surround, people who might be a little bit reticent about stepping forward, the tall poppy, the whatever it might be, will eventually, if we push them enough. I could name and shame 100 people from CESI who said, no, not me. I couldn't. And when they did eventually afterwards, there's always like a feeling of phew, and it happens in Gasta and Brewed and all the other sort of descendants, of Teachmeet as well. Gosh, I'm really glad I did that. And it's one of the reasons I'm really interested in watching the student teachers. A lot of places now are introducing their student teachers to the Teachmeet format. It was Bianca, our late friend Bianca Nigrogan, who started it in the Rebel College here. So and Secura Brennan and Marino, a lot of teachers are doing it now, showing the youngsters, this is what we can do, and gathering an audience for them and doing a Teach Me event. And they're growing up with it. They're not afraid of it. Like you said earlier, Ewan, now it seems like not a new thing, even though I'm immersed in it and I'm studying it. There are still tiny unique things about it that are important, but it isn't new. It was there before Teach Me, as you have often said yourself. It was there before 2006.
It's interesting that
you do yourself down. The name that you chose, the name that you all collectively chose, is really important. The name and the branding of it it's all it has. It has nothing. It doesn't even have a .com. It has nothing except the name. And from that name hangs a kind of a mythos and an ethos that I'm trying to, at the moment, I'm trying to document.
Because that's something I want to talk about, Mag. Sorry, Ewan, for cutting you off there, because just in our own, just for the sake of this podcast, otherwise we'd be here for the next 14 hours talking about this. Just the growth of Teachmeet, the origins of Teachmeet. John has kindly done up, super producer John has done up a list for me to follow. So we've discussed the origins of Teachmeet, growth of Teachmeet, futures of Teachmeet. I want to talk a bit more about that. Impact of Teachmeet I've mentioned kind of briefly. Mags, you didn't just introduce, I'm going to say Mags introduced Teachmeets to Ireland. So that's it. That's it. I'm saying it. It's true. But Mags, you're studying Teachmeets. Your whole PhD is about Teachmeets. How do you go from witnessing, attending a Teachmeet, and then going, right, I'm going to do my entire PhD on Teachmeets?
Now, I'll tell you how you do it, because you go out on a very, very wet Thursday night. You drive to Maynooth, you watch a Teachmeet, which just has all the joy. This is the word I keep going back to all the time. All the joy of learning in the room. And on the way home in the driving rain, you're trying to stay out of the potholes, and you're wondering, like, what causes this? A thing with just a name. Like, what is it that brings this together? So I can't call that the name of my study. My study is an exploration into the nature and niche and essence of Teachmeet, the phenomenon. And I don't know, I'm nearly at the end, and I'm looking forward to telling people everything. But actually, the origins and the growth comes down to something like, it's like, I want one of those. You, the thing about Teachmeet is that it begets more Teachmeets. And Ewan is the only person who really can talk about this, because he started the first one with John and David. And the rest of us sort of, no, I do you a disservice.
Well,
You also,
I'm going to come back on that point.
You midwived it and fostered it beautifully. But when somebody of a certain nature goes to a Teachmeet, they walk out that door saying, I'm going to do one of those. I want one of those for my friends. I call these people the bringers. I want to bring it to others.
So there's something in the DNA that's really important, probably not known, or maybe it's not important, but I actually got in. So the idea didn't emerge from nowhere either. No. That's the truth of it. So in 2005, I went to Paris in December as a speaker on a panel at a thing called Le Web. No, it was called Les Blogs. It was before they discovered the rest of the web. So it was a French conference run by Louis Lemur, big French entrepreneur living in San Francisco now. And I was on the last panel of the day on a Monday, and the audience had stuck around to hear about education and blogs. And it was, if I'm honest, the other three panelists, they were talking about theoretical ideas of blogging. And with my kids in school, we had blogged for 3 years before that. So I had all these great stories to tell. And then realized from the IRC chat that was scrolling behind me that people were more distracted by my accent. A whole bunch of Americans basically in the room were distracted by my accent and not really listening to the stories we were told. One of them came up to me afterwards and said, I love what you're doing with students and blogs. Would you like to come to a bar camp that we're organizing? I said, oh, what's that? Thinking it was something I should have known about. Bar camp had started in August that year. This was one of the founders of that, Chris Messina, who is also the originator of the hashtag, which has become a crucial part of Teachmeets, being able to communicate. So Chris invited me to the bar camp in Paris that he had organized, that he had put out there, that it was on. And so we all went to the top of the Concorde Lafayette bar in Paris in the 33rd floor, and had a bar camp. And it was really interesting. It was very informal. And that's what that was a seed planted in 2005. And that in the following year, early 2006, I, along with two others, started Bar Camp Scotland. And it was for the tech industry in Scotland. And it was the first time it had been done. And it was a venture capitalist, a tech investor, and me organizing this event. And at the time, Twitter was playing off Jaiku, and Jaiku was a Finnish Twitter at the time, and we all thought Jaiku was going to win, but that's how people communicated. And we were using keywords like Teachmeet, and it had to hang together. If it was too long, people would forget it, and if it was 2 words, you wouldn't be able to find it. And when you look for Teachmeet, there's nothing there. And so that's why the name is important, but it also sums up quite a lot of what it's actually about. It happens to. Yeah. So I went to a bar camp, and I was inspired to start a bar camp in Scotland, which then also inspired me to say, you know what, half the people at that bar camp were actually in education, higher education mostly, but they were all in education. Let's do something for teachers. And that was the conversation we ended up having at Scottish Learning Festival. And when you think about the number of conversations that happen in schools, the challenge, I think, is people have probably organized things like this without even knowing they've organized it. Lots of discussions happen in schools about how we could do things differently, do things better, and then no one acts on it. No one goes off and actually puts it into action. And I think that's something any learning organization could do better, is hold people to account in a fun, informal way. If you have a conversation this week, you will have a conversation this week. It's going to lead to a great idea. Have you got your book where you write down your ideas? And at the end of the week, can you translate one of those ideas into a thing that you're actually going to try? And if every school, if every university did that, can you just imagine the number of grassroots ideas that would be buzzing around our schools and buzzing around our organizations? We wouldn't need conferences anymore because people would be doing the work, and networking is part of the job.
Ewan, you raise so many points there of how do we capture that? Like where do we go from here? What's the
There
future of
was
Teachmeets? Like
there was
what?
that attempt to capture in video format. Leon Sitch did a heroic effort trying to capture videos of everyone speaking, and it was a great effort, but it doesn't. You're either going to attend a teach meet or not. You're not going to sit there trawling through hours of video footage. There are blogs everywhere about stuff people have been inspired by in teach meets, but again, you have to really want to go and bump into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the idea that it's somehow a course or a talk that you can learn from after the fact, I think we've already said it's not the talk that's important, it's the discussion that happens in the corridor and the table in between times. So I think the capturing is less important, actually, than everyone committing, pledging to do something on the back of it. It might be to start doing another teach meet, or it might, which is the kind of traditional rallying call, but it might also just be, I am going to take one thing I've learned from this and I'm going to apply it in my classroom. And if we knew that that was going on, that's a huge amount of change, positive change happening in schools with very little cost behind it. Very unplanned and very organic, but if it's good change and it makes an impact on students' experience, generally those ideas tend to spread pretty well.
Yeah, it's something that came out of the bar camp philosophy, and something that Stephen Howell said to me one day. It's kind of like the opposite to Fight Club. The one thing you do after Teach Meet is talk about Teach Meet, whether it be that idea, that one idea that you bring back to your staff room from it, or that you will have another Teach Meet, but that it must flow on organically rather than sort of let's build more of these. It must kind of flow its own way. And one of the things I found people saying is they really, they want it to flow on, but as it, to evolve as it has evolved. It's only 16. It's only like a little baby teenager yet. So let it grow, and don't try to fence or corral it.
That's one thing I get asked all the time is, when are you organizing the next Teach Meet? And I have to say, it's not up to me to organize the next Teach Meet.
Yep.
There's an education center, and it's there to be used. Let's go, let's meet, and let's talk about stuff that you're doing in your classroom, and let's share those ideas, and we'll share them amongst ourselves. What do you think? And this one is for both of you, keeping in mind that we can't capture, what is it? You can't capture a lightning bolt, but you can't capture Teach Meet. But what does the evolution of Teach Meet look like, in your own opinions?
Part of me, it's going to sound a little bit cruel, part of me doesn't care, because it's not mine to care about.
Cool.
Which and also I have 2 kids. I have a ridiculously busy job as well, and I understand from a user perspective how hard it is to justify leaving your family for an evening to go and learn in that way. So I think that the healthiest thing that can happen is when people from Teach Meets talk to each other off the record, if you like, and away from the actual event itself, and you see that happening. There's something emerging which I find really unhealthy, though, which is this kind of us and them cliques on Twitter, on social media, haranguing each other over whether something is good or bad for learning and teaching. I'm tying it into a bit of a slanging match around whose ideas are best. And all of this discussion is about research. It's about philosophical approaches quite often. It's not actually about what happens in a classroom. Teach Meet was always about what happens in a classroom. So I think if we could create that very pragmatic, this is what we do this is what I do in my classroom, this is what we do in our school. If we could change the language around the way we talk about progressing change in a school for the better, to being less philosophical, less ideological, and make it more about ideas that have been worked on and have either worked or not worked, but people have learned from them, then I think that would be a really positive next step, even if there were never another pub filled with teachers. if the dialogue around education could really shift quite markedly towards practice that has worked and practice that has not worked, and people are prepared to share and learn from it, then I would be very happy.
Mags, you wanted to jump in there.
Well, look, I'm a biologist, and evolution takes place in little jumps and starts. It's organic, and you can't force it. And circumstances sometimes, you know, change the run of things. But you know, like, it's already started to evolve within the 16 years of Teachmeet. Daryl Simon Egan and Ed Finch have started BrewEd, taking maybe a more Ed Camp twist on the Teachmeet. Pedagogue has started back up in Scotland again. How come you keep on starting things? Tom Farley here in Ireland has taken the Pechakucha push through Teachmeet of Gasta, and it's wonderfully popular with people who are at a big conference, and they want a blast of air in between. So look, it's finding its own level, and we haven't mentioned the pandemic. Pandemic has brought it right back to its roots. I don't know if you remember, Ewan, but in the very first year, you were inviting people to join in via Skype if they couldn't get to the thing.
That's right. My old colleague Ewan from the Isle of Islay was one of the first. Yeah. Yeah,
it's like really what I'm finding, and I'm kind of looking at it from a drone's eye view. I'm trying to get up here and look at everybody and what they're thinking. But to be honest, there are a few essential signature elements that have to be there, and you're very humble. The role of the MC is really important. It goes back to the session, and sometimes I'm thinking it's almost like Teachmeet is like hip hop to classical music. The MC is very important. The open space technology from which Barcamp and Teachmeet and EdCamp all came, that ability to get up and walk away, law of 2 feet, whatever, if you're not happy. So once that very central core, the one thing I would say is people love the idea of Teachmeet. It's its own worst enemy. The name is wonderful. The risk is the greatest benefit is the greatest risk. Let's have a Teachmeet, like Mrs. Merton. Let's have a heated debate. So people say, let's have a Teachmeet, but go into it without knowing what it is. So I would say find its DNA, find its origins. Read my book when I get it sorted. Read my. Well, I'll have it down on one. I'll have one A4 page for us, and even that I don't want to do it. It's not prescriptive. It's more about it's about atmosphere and ethos and trust.
It goes back to that thing though of knowing where ideas come from, and as you say, I think a lot of people pick up on ideas without knowing where the idea comes from, which is why there are some effectively just. I'll say it, they're copycats. It's the same thing with a different name. Why have they done that? Because they didn't really understand what the original thing was in the first place. And that's not just about this. There's so many ideas in education where people don't know where it comes from, which is why people keep having to bang on about the same old thing, and people make the same old mistakes, which is great if you work in our business because you get to solve them all out for them again. But it's you've got to, in jazz music, they say you've got to pay your dues, which means you got to do your homework and work out where stuff comes from so that you can then improvise on top of it. If you've ever heard someone who's not done their homework trying to improvise, it's painful. And the same goes for this. Yeah, there's a lovely feel of apprenticeship through it, Has, that I'm finding. People who just went because they were really curious. I want to know, what's this thing about? And then it kind of, well, I did something last Thursday. I'm going to share it at the next one. And then the third stage, well, look, this is really, really good. I'm going to bring it to my colleagues or bring it to my town. So there is a lovely feel of just organic apprenticeship. Teachers passing things on to each other, telling stories around the campfire.
I'm a big fan of Teachmeets. That goes without saying, but I'm annoyed. It annoys me, to be honest, to be sitting in a staff room that's a very big staff room, and to have, and I use this example all the time, Ewan and Mags, you have a technology teacher on one side of you, and the technology teacher is talking to me and going, if only we had some sort of robotics thing to do a thing, I'd be able to engage with my students more. And then you go to the other side of you, and you have your technology teacher, or so you have a technology teacher, or you have a woodwork teacher or a metalwork teacher, and he's saying, I have a whole bunch of these robots, if only I knew how to code them. And I'm sitting in the middle going, have you actually met each other? Like, seriously? have you met each other? And it's something that was said, and I can't remember on which staff room, but the actual staff room in a school is such an amazing place. There's very few working environments. Normally a working environment, it's all coders, or it's all accountants, or it's all whatever. In the school staff room, there's musicians and there's linguists and there's engineers. The point I was making is you have the staff room is such an amazing place, and an awful lot of the time there's no communication happening within it, although teachers could write a paper on communication within a school without the use of emails and that. Ewan, what projects are you working on at the minute that you want to tell us about? Because I know I have a cheat sheet here in front of me. So I want you to tell me about that project you're working on.
Well, I think that it ties in quite nicely, actually, because we're talking about adult learning, and the reason your staff room can't be that place is because it's the wrong context, it's the wrong time, with the wrong people, the wrong politics, the wrong energy, and the wrong drink in your hand. It's all the wrong stuff. So the context for adult learning is something that's often neglected, and not just in education, but in life. So with an incredible woman, Andreea Mitrea in Romania, she approached us just before the first lockdown of the pandemic began to hit, and was actually about to pull the plug on the project. And we said, look, all of our other customers have left us. We lost 85% of our customers in the space of 10 days. And I said, I've got time, which is rare. Let's just do it. We'll pay some sweat equity. And if we get this idea off the ground, I'll be more than proud of it. And in the end, I should first of all point out, we got every one of our 85% of those clients back, bar one. They eventually realized that things don't just stop. In fact, it's the opposite. We need to keep developing ideas and developing people. But in the meantime, we had created a new school out of nowhere. And it's remarkable because the business model for the school is innovative. It's actually a construction project where we've built a village during the pandemic in the hills of Transylvania next to the city of Cluj. And all of those sold, and they needed a school. So 2 of the houses were knocked together to make the first school. The construction of phase 2, which turns this village into a town, is underway, and all those homes are being sold, which means we're able to open a middle and high school in a couple of years. And we've just hired our first head of school, all the way from Buenos Aires, an Englishman coming with his family to the hills of Transylvania to run that school. What's magic about the school is it's not for children. Most schools have this one group of learners, and Colina Learning Centre has 2, children and adults. And it's actually a dual curriculum school, because we felt that the vision for the school is that we'll build a learning culture through every home. And I think actually a lot of schools would have that as a purpose, as a goal. But you can't do that unless you're in every home. And so the purpose of the school is to support everyone, adults and kids, to learn how to thrive in life. And the curriculum is designed in a way that the children have their program, which is tied to standards, New York State standards, in fact, and will lead to qualifications in a traditional sense. But alongside that is a curriculum that parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, locals in the community can engage with, to talk about the same themes in a different way, and look at how they grow their brain, their heart, their physical health, their spiritual health as well. And kind of the community is incredible. It's a school that has its own organic farm on site. It has an incredibly robust, rigorous early years curriculum in place already. And the learning is designed for children and adults equally. And I think that that's phenomenal. And the impact it's had when we hadn't even advertised any jobs, and we found ourselves with job applications streaming in because people said, I just want to work for that school. That's the kind of thing I want to be part of. And so in August, 2 and a bit years after helping to create the vision and the purpose and the curriculum and the even down to some of the physical aspects of the school. I've never actually been on site, and I've never met any of the team in person before. So in August this year, I'll get a chance to go and hang out in the school that I helped to build for the first time, which is extraordinary and crazy. I'm looking forward to it.
That sounds amazing. I have absolutely no words other than that sounds amazing.
It's
really
crazy. And they've good faith. We talk about good faith. The good faith they showed in us. This is a kind of VC venture capital type people from Silicon Valley who've, they've made their money and they want to invest it in something worthwhile. And they fell in love with Romania, as a lot of people do when they visit it. And he says, right, we'll build a village and we'll build the world's best school, which is basically what we're trying to do. But I met with the board and said, they said, we're not sure what's going to happen with construction, whether the project's going to be a success, because no one knows what's happening in the world at this point. This was in March 2020. And when I said, look, I'll do it for free, I'll do it in return for good feeling, they said, you sure? Said, yeah, I'm in. And they trusted us to do good work. And what we've done is just blown expectations out of the water. So there's a whole new Romanian family over there for me to enjoy at some point when I get over.
We'll build the best school in the world. Folks, that's the show title right there.
You don't have to actually manage to do it, but trying is the important part.
Yeah, Martin Luther King, he didn't say I have an idea. He said I have a dream. So
yeah. And it's interesting. I think schools have to think about their families. When you're starting from scratch, you choose the family that you want to come to the school. So we want to be the best school in the world for dynamic, enlightened families who want to thrive in this kind of connected world. So most of the people moving to this community are homeworkers. They are digital people. They understand, they have a sense of design. They don't think that their kid is going to necessarily go to Harvard to be successful in life. And so they're also making the school what it is. They're quite a refreshing bunch.
And can I ask a silly question? What does it look like? What does the 9 to 5 look like? Or what does you walk in the door? Draw us a picture.
It's having never been, it's quite hard to draw a picture.
This is exactly why I asked you, because I want to hear your picture. And then my next question is, I wonder, will that picture match up to?
Well, it's inspired a great deal by Scottish Gordonstoun expeditionary learning, influenced by all the work that Ron Ron Berger and colleagues over in the States have done in expeditions. Influenced heavily by what then the team at XB School in the north of England have done with it, infused with the research and design cycle that we've been working on for the last 12 years. So when you walk in, you'll see kids, whatever age they are, they'll be in one of 5 stages of learning. They'll either be discovering, which is all that immersing into something new. They'll be, and that discovery is using all 4 senses. So they are out in the mud, they are in the garden, they're doing all that kind of stuff, they're not just in a class or in a space. We have a dream phase, which is allowing kids to dream. So this is what you've just kind of been exposed to. What would you like to do with it? And so negotiating curriculum with children. What do we do next? Researching. So now that you've settled on a research goal, go do your homework. So be interested in stuff that you wouldn't normally be interested in. Expand what you know. Build your understanding of stuff that you think you know, but you're not sure. Build your knowledge. Knowledge is super important in this as well, because they can't really progress their ideas unless they know, but they have a deep desire to learn new stuff because they've got this dream that they've come up with. Then really important, do it. So manifest, move into action. You can probably hear a little bit of Teachmeet pedagogy coming in there as well. So, shaping, get feedback and keep going, persevere. And then the final part is transform. So really important is that we measure the impact of what young people or the adult learners actually achieve. So there is showcasing, there is celebrating all the stuff you'd see in any school, but there's also looking at expanding beyond the school into the community. And actually we're exploring Colina Nua communities in lots of other places around the world, in Latin America at the moment. So there'll be that opportunity as well to share ideas and see if they work in a completely different context. when you walk in, these are very little people at the moment. They are 4, 5, 6 years old at the moment. We have double the number of kids than we can cope with. And so the need to expand is there. But if you want to see what it looks like, you go to kolinalearning.com. Kolina is Romanian for hill. So kolinalearning.com. And you'll see plenty of some of the most beautifully shot practitioner video that you will ever see in the world. The one thing we do really well at NoTosh and with the team at Kolina is branding and storytelling. So you will see beautiful stories told in HD 4K. So enjoy going to have a look at that.
And I'll have a link in wherever I share this. Mags, we look forward to your PhD. We look forward to reading it. Mags, when are you? When can we get our hands on it? When can we have you go through the Teachmeet at a talk about your
let's
PhD?
say my student card runs out at the end of 2022, so like there's your deadline sorted for you. No, I'm nearly there. I find the writing as me difficult. It's easy when I'm writing the voice of Ewan or the voice of all my fantastic, incredible contributors, but just I'm not a natural writer, as you can. I'm a talker. But I'm plugging through. I'm here in my ivory tower, plugging through all the time. Can't wait to get to the real world, Hassan. Can't wait to go back to my Turtle Stitch and all the other bits and bobs that I play with, and CESI, my CESI folk, and Meets and all of that.
Look at
the real world, as I call it.
I didn't give you your full introduction at the start, simply because I want to have you on again just to talk about Mags Amond, teacher, where you are, sort of your journey to date, excluding Teachmeets, so to bring in the CESI side of it. So you will be back. Ewan, I want you back just to somehow harness some of that energy, that positive energy. I mean, seriously, if you could bottle that, like, your energy is addictive. Is that right? Like, I think talk to you forever.
My colleague Brad Carter in Tokyo, he's a Canadian in Tokyo, and even that might give you a clue as to his attitude in life. He's been part of our team for the last 18 months on some really challenging projects in the Middle East and other places internationally, but working at distance and strange time zones, which is never easy. And occasionally I get worried about other people's energy working on those kinds of time zones and with those kinds of deadlines. And there's two things he shared recently. We shared them in our provocation newsletter. This one was, I think, just last week even, that you can, when you're being asked to do work, he generally says either yup, nope, or groovy. Yup means I'll do it. It won't take me 2 minutes. It's probably quicker for me to do it than you to do it. Nope means no. Shut up, move on. I'm not going to do it. And groovy means not only will I do it, but I'll probably invest far more time than you're paying me for to do it, because I'll enjoy doing it. And I think that's a very healthy approach to take to invitations to do things or requests. And then the other thing that he taught me over the past 18 months is the choices we all take in life about the work we do. His thing is to do, and it sounds a bit hippie maybe, but his choice is to do cool work with cool people in cool places. Now, if you're a teacher in your school, you might kind of think, well, I'm stuck with two of those things. I have no control over those things. But even just cool work, make your work cool. And I think that you can complain about standards, you can complain about testing, you can complain about so many things in teaching, but there's actually a lot to love in it. And you've got to maybe, this is a good point, a spring clean almost, audit everything you're doing. Ask yourself what you're going to stop, ask yourself what you're going to keep doing. And then the fun part is, well, actually the fun part is what you're going to get rid of, what you're going to stop, but the other fun part is what are you going to start. And I think if you do go to a Teachmeet, you should go having already done that audit and worked out what you're stopping, so that you've got room on your slate to get something new in there. And that should be cool. It should be cool. Don't Don't take on noble work that you feel you've got to do. I wouldn't do a PhD. I couldn't write in the ivory tower language of a PhD. However, when Mags has done that, I would love to get my teeth stuck into translating it into plain English that I can understand.
You're hired.
That's fun. That would be groovy work. And I think that people are it's worth getting into that mindset of realizing you don't always have to do everything you're asked to do. Everyone's got a degree of agency, but sometimes you just have to have the courage to say nope, so that you can say yup and groovy to more things.
I love the idea of go to a Teachmeet and think about what you're going to remove, what you're going to stop.
You got to do that before you go. You got to do it before you go. Clean the slate.
Don't go and go, I'm going to do something new. Just decide before you go, okay, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to that part. Yeah, I love it. Ewan McIntosh, Mags Amond, thank you very much for joining me in the CESI staff room. It's